a diverse group we have joining us for this conversation today. Would also love to hear what are you hoping to get out of the conversation today? What are the takeaways, the insights that would be useful to you in the conversations that you're having? Go ahead and put that in the chat as well. We have people joining us from the change management side as well as from the coaching side, and really these events are a great way to share our expertise and find the intersections so we can partner together more effectively in organizations. And we're looking forward to a rich conversation today. Go ahead and advance to the next slide and we'll dive into where we're headed today. There's so much change going on right now. I mean, change seems to be the only constant. And so when you look at that in the context of organizations, it's how do you create change that is sustainable, both for the organization, but also for the well-being of people. So as we dive into this today, we're going to hear from multiple perspectives about the conversations that are happening at that executive leadership level in order to create that pathway towards change. So looking forward to getting insight on that, but also being able to have an interactive conversation of what you're observing in your organizations as well. But before we dive into today's conversation, I want to give you a little bit of context about the partnership between ICF and ACMP. So go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk through what we're really about. It's demonstrating the synergy that we have in the disciplines of change management and coaching, that it really is all about equipping leaders and organizations with the tools that they need in order to help people navigate change. And in putting this partnership together, the goal was to be able to share across the competencies of the disciplines, the code of ethics, but also to create collaborative opportunities, both to share knowledge as well as how can we better work together in organizations. And this partnership began in the late summer of 2020, and we've been meeting monthly and now quarterly to have these events where we can interact as people professionals. So go ahead and advance to the next slide there if that works. The interaction between ICF and ACMP really happens at multiple levels of synergy. Part of it is just creating awareness of what is distinct about coaching, what is distinct about change management, but also how do they intersect with each other. We've also been creating thought leadership in the two disciplines so that we can provide resources and tools that people can use, whether it's navigating through diversity topics or having coaching conversations to help leaders navigate through change. And really the greatest benefit has been the networking opportunities that have come through these shared events. And we're looking forward to more of that, even headed into 2022. Be sure to stay tuned. We're looking at launching some local networking opportunities as well to be able to meet in person and virtually to intersect in our change management and coaching field. So more to come on that in 2022. Go ahead and advance to the next slide there. We have people across the state that are connected in this partnership. ICF San Antonio with Susanna Clavello, ICF Austin, ICF Houston is hosting us here today, and then we have ACMP across Texas as well. So we've been collaborating to put these events together and really provide resources for professionals in the industry. And I am so thrilled with the caliber of people that we have joining us today for our conversation. And you are in for a real treat, both statewide and nationally, in terms of who we get to hear from. So it's my great pleasure to turn things over to Lindsay Hanari, who is the president of ICF Houston.
Thanks so much, Marissa. As she mentioned, ICF Houston is hosting this event. As coaches and change management professionals, we're all collaborative in nature. So we're excited to be the host for this final event of 2021. And we continue to benefit from the collaboration, the skill building, and the knowledge sharing between ACMP and ICF Texas chapters. And I take great pleasure in introducing the multi-talented David Bell, your moderator for today's panel. David is a performance coach and learning delivery leader who builds high-impact teams that break down silos and deliver business results. As we were chatting earlier in our pre-meeting prep, David has lived pretty much all over Texas, but for the past 15 years, he's deployed his talents at Amegy Bank, where he's a senior vice president and performance development consultant. I know him as a delightful member of ICF Houston, and he is also uniquely qualified to serve as your moderator, for not only is he an ICF certified coach, but has also held multiple leadership roles in local Toastmaster chapters, as well as served as an area director for Toastmasters International. He has also served as a board member and past president of the Association for Talent Development's Houston chapter. So I leave you in the good hands of David and our panelists and look forward to the Q&A portion following our panel discussion. David?
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Thank you for our audience today. This is going to be an exciting session. I see many friends on the line, and I see new friends as well. So we're looking forward to this discussion today. I'll get right to it. I want to introduce our panelists. It's a special group. I feel just humbled and honored at the same time to be a part of this. First of all, I want to introduce Dr. Csuite Anyanwu. She will be representing the executive leader, and I'd like for her to come on screen and tell us a little bit about herself, her role within her organization as well. Csuite?
Good morning, everybody from San Antonio. I notice we're from all over the world, so I'll just greet you with my time of the day. So good morning. I am Csuite Anyanwu. I am the Director of Organizational Development and Culture at CPS Energy. Within that, I have purview over leadership development, employee experience, performance management, succession planning, and people analytics. So if he has to deal with people and development, I have a little bit of a touch in it. And with that, I work with all levels of the organization, but most of my time is spent with the senior leaders, setting the direction and making sure we're developing our people. I'm glad to have a conversation today.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing more from you. Our next panelist is Dr. Diane Brennan. She will be representing the Csuite coach. She's played multiple roles as well. In introducing her, Dr. Diane Brennan. Welcome.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. It is great to be here with you all today. I have been, the last 4 years, I have been within the University of Arizona. I came in initially as a leadership coach, executive leadership coach, working with the vice presidents and the deans for the colleges. moved into organizational development as the director of the organizational development and leadership coaching area. And then the last 2 years, I've been the assistant vice president for human resources. Not a place that I started or would have expected to be, but a place that I'm absolutely loving. Prior to joining the University of Arizona, I was a contractor with them, as well as with many companies as an executive coach. And so I had 15 years as in my own business, doing executive coaching and leadership development, and really started in coaching in 2000 and was on the ICF global board. And, in 2000, actually went to my first ICF conference in Vancouver and met colleagues like all of you, and came back to my community and said, we need this community in Tucson. And I found everyone who was doing something like I was doing, and we started the ICF Tucson chapter that now has turned into our statewide chapter, which is really cool to see. Let's see, prior to coming into coaching, I was in an executive position in healthcare. I spent a fair amount of time in healthcare, and those are folks that I worked with, but I kept my regular job while I was becoming a coach. And it was a good thing to do. But after about 1.5 years, I ended up going on my own. And in 2003, I joined the global board of ICF, and I was ICF global president in 2008. So I had the privilege of getting to meet and work with people all over the world. I'm excited to be here with you as well, as Chi-Chi said, to have a conversation because we all learn so much together, and happy to share some of what I've learned, but also really excited to learn from all of you as well.
Thank you, Diane. We appreciate you being here today. Our next panelist is Susan Franzen. She's going to be representing the Csuite Change Leader. So tell us a little bit about you, Susan.
Thank you, David. I'm also very excited to be here with all of you. So I was president of a leadership and organizational development national company for 18 years. And then I went on to work with the University of Texas system for 11 years as assistant vice chancellor for organizational effectiveness, leading a variety of change efforts across the state for 14 institutions. And then left there to join Pattern Shifts as managing partner. I also serve as a vice president of strategy and leadership for Axiom Learning Solutions. And my role is really to focus on how do we get the individuals to change in order to drive organizational change. And that's where I think the beauty of this partnership between ACMP and ICF falls, because it addresses the entire package of change. And so I'm really excited to be here. I have a master's in the neuroscience of leadership with a focus on change. And so really, I love to learn from everyone what your experiences are in the field and be able to share what our experiences are as well.
Thank you, Susan. I have to recall in your bio, it said, I read neural leadership for fun. I'm like, I love that.
Yes.
I know I'm among my peeps when I hear things like that. Well, my first question to the panel, and all of you are welcome to answer, is how does culture impact change? And I'll start with you, Chi-Chi. How does culture impact change? And you're on mute.
That's a hard one. How does culture impact change? It impacts it in terms of how well you adjust to change. Change is the only constant, so it is going to happen. So your culture can make it easier for you to go with change, or we can make it hard that you stay behind and change passes you by. So building your culture to be flexible, to be easily pivoted is the key, because change is going to happen. That is inevitable. So culture can make or break it, make or break the organization, because change is going to happen, whether you get into the change or not.
Other thoughts, Diane?
Yeah, to add, you know, as I think about that, I think about all the change that we've all been through over the last almost, you know, now I guess almost 2 years. When, you know, if leaders aren't engaged, they can, as Chichi said, you know, it breaks down. When I think about where we were prior to the pandemic, with change, we were actually helping to prepare. So we're an organization of 15,000 faculty and staff, 15,000 employees around Arizona, most of them in Tucson, but around the state as well as some other states because of one of our colleges that has an extension program. And the leaders wanted us in organizational development, or they wanted HR to actually drive the change. And that can't work completely. You know, we can drive it from the bottom up, but we can't really take their role. They need to be part of it. And so helping them to even understand what's the role in change. It was amazing to see and hear people, and I'm sure our change management folks would have seen this, but I remember being somewhat surprised at the amount of misunderstanding around what happens in change and how they need to work through it. And so not having, you know, if we think about the basics, not having the why are we doing this, the compelling reason really articulated or people engaged in the process can really cause the system to experience failure. And we're also, I should say, in higher education, kind of in an individualistic culture, because people are rewarded for being really good researchers or excellent at their teaching, and so having them see the impact of how they can work together is kind of challenging. It's changing, but it's slow. And then I think about the pandemic and just what we've seen. Change has happened rapidly, but it also exposed where the gaps are.
Thank you, Diane. How about you, Susan?
Thank you, David. I think Chichi and Diane added a lot of value in terms of that, and I'll add some of the neuroscience around it. So our individually and collectively as organizations, we want to maintain a status quo, the homeostasis, that balance between comfort and discomfort. Change creates discomfort. And so when we think about culture is about preserving that status quo or that comfort level. And so culture can actually absorb and neutralize changes that we're trying to make, even if it's in the best interest of the individuals in the organization. So I think the best gift that we can give to employees in organizations is to find that right balance of stability and novelty, because the novelty is what's going to inspire us to want to change, and the stability is going to give us the certainty and the comfort to be able to make those changes.
I'm curious, how does change impact culture? So we've talked a little bit about how culture impacts change, but how can change really dramatically impact the culture of an organization?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me is an experience we had in this last year that kind of illustrated it pretty vividly. Here, as I said, we're somewhat of an individualistic culture, but when we had a mandate for, in the pandemic, furlough or pay reduction, people united around that. To express their dissatisfaction with it. It actually brought people together in a somewhat disruptive way, but at the same time, a real opportunity for learning. And the challenge, there were many challenges, but one of the challenges when I think about coaching and with leaders was helping them to understand that, all of us, to understand that we needed to listen. What was happening? How are we going to work through this? Because again, we had gone into this thing suddenly, change that really caused a lot of chaos. That was not, I look back on that, and my colleagues, we were the implementers of that program. We were not the designers of it, but it caused a lot of additional work and challenge and unrest. And at the same time, we've learned and have been able to work through some of those things.
Yeah,
I think change, sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
Oh, go ahead, Chi-Chi.
Chi-Chi?
I think change highlights your culture.
Mm-hmm.
What we went through, what we all just went through in the last 2 years, exaggerated what you have or what you didn't have. So I think change is a good thing to a culture because it holds up that mirror to say, am I living my culture? Is what I say my culture is what it really is? When you have to change it and when you see how people react or don't react, or how painful or normal changes to you, it starts making you look at your culture. It highlights what needs to start happening, what you need to change. And I think change is the best thing that can happen to any culture in terms of sustainability and resilience.
I like
agree.
that. I think in terms of looking in the mirror and what you see is what you get. I like that. Susan?
Well, and I think change can intentionally and unintentionally impact culture. And right now we're facing this conundrum where a lot of executives want to have people come back into the offices because they want to return to the culture that they had before. And we have all of these employees in the Great Resignation saying, I want more flexibility, because the culture has changed, but not everybody has caught up with that change yet. And so, you know, there's been very carefully crafted intentional cultures that were built over years. And then within the last 2 years, this very unintentional culture has emerged, and it's very strong, and we need to reconcile with that.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is there's an impact on both. There's a culture can impact the change of the organization and how fast they change or how slow they change, or the status quo, so to speak, as was mentioned. But also change can really reveal what the culture is and what it is to the organization and how the impact of that. Chi-Chi, I have a question for you, representing the C-suite leader. What do you see when an organization is facing change? What do you see the role of the C-suite leader? Or how do you see that role?
There is multiple roles that the C-suite needs to play. First is to be calm. Because if you're calm, the organization will stay calm. And in that calmness, set the direction. Because everybody needs to go in the same direction. And it is that C-suite's role to set what direction that is. But the setting the direction is not in the absence of the people. So it's also their role to stay in tune with what people are feeling and what they're needing, and what they need in the moment to be able to handle what is coming next. So visioning is the role.
And you say in tune. How does a leader stay in tune?
There's many ways, right? How is your organization set up that what's happening in the field is bubbling up to the leaders? That's one of the issues many C-suites have. They're not aware. So it starts with that culture, setting up a culture where information is going constantly 2 ways, and not in a way that it is punitive, like only when somebody did something bad that the leader hears about it, but that you're getting information, period. It isn't good or bad. It is just, this is information you need to know. So you can do polls, or you can just go and visit people. Have an open door, a true open door policy where people can see you and talk to you, let you know what's going on. So you really, really need to keep in touch, especially in this hybrid world that we're going into. Find a way to keep talking to people. Find a way to send in conversations or word to you so you know what's going on.
I like that. And that really is a lot more difficult in a work from home environment where you just don't see your folks every day, and you've got to be really intentional about that, it sounds like.
Yes.
Susan, I'm going to ask you, in the role of this change manager, what do you see as the role of the change manager within the organization? What does that role look like to you?
So I'll talk about the ideal role and not the role that most change managers end up assuming.
Maybe talk about both. It sounds interesting to me.
So the ideal role is the change manager is the thought partner. The change manager is brought in by the executive as a partner prior to any changes, any decisions about those changes, any changes being made, because the change manager really has the pulse of the people in the organization, and they have a sense for what you can sell, if you will, what you can promote to people, what they're willing to accept. So really good at assessing their readiness. But a lot of times those change managers are not brought in until after the decisions are made, and then it's here, go implement it. That really puts the organization at a deficit, because the change manager has not been there to guide and help influence how the decisions are made, what level of involvement is there, and then how the messaging will go out. Because, you know, if we get the messaging wrong, we don't make change. That goes back to that neutral, you know, absorb and neutralize the change. So the change manager I really see as sort of a thought partner, the pulse, the evangelist, and the reconciler. So trying to make sense of where executive leadership wants to go and where the people want to go, and how do you bring those two together?
Yeah. So how do you bring those two together?
So again, this goes back to that thought partner role, right? So if and I actually see the coach as part of this too, right? If the coach, the executive, and the change manager are all thought partners together, then that really gives you an opportunity to do that reconciliation prior to announcing it and getting resistance. So how do you deliver it in ways that go around the resistance or reduce the resistance for individuals? And that's really the benefit of having that combined thought partner relationship.
Yeah, just in our preview of this session today, it was obvious to me that each of you have represented all of these roles. And so it brings a different perspective to the equation, especially if you appreciate the other roles on the team. And that's what I'm hearing from you, Susan, is really being the thought leader, thought partner, as I heard you say, for the group.
Yes.
Diane, similar question, the role of the coach.
Yeah.
As it relates to change in an organization.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that with thinking about within the organization I'm in now, but also in previous work that I've done as an independent coach with executives, with CEOs. And it is being that trusted partner and making sure that you're actually thinking about change to be able to ask who else is supporting you. I think one of the best way is to have the change partner, the coach, and the leader. But often they're not in that, as Susan said, they're already down the road of thinking what they want to have happen. So being able to have that conversation in the safe space to call out what's missing, what else do you need? Because as we know, I think if we've worked with leaders, you probably have seen everybody thinks they should know everything. And yet that's not who people need to be. And the better they can ask for help and support, even as the CEO, and not think they have to do it all, the better it will be. I think the coach is the truth teller as well, to be able to see things that maybe others can't. Being in that, not as a judge, but as a learner, being able to look, we say, being neutral, I think, is what, as we are learning coaching, not having bias, but we know we bring all that into a conversation, but it's trying to hold the space to be able to we're not going to be telling them what to do, but we are going to be having a conversation around what's happening, what are you learning, what are we noticing here. I reflect on some of my favorite learning Remember, I worked with a hospital CEO on the East Coast. I live in Arizona, and I wouldn't be there all the time. We'd do some Zoom or telephone, but there were times I was on site, and the things that happened when I would be on site were always such a gift to be able to make an observation and help not only the executive understand what was happening, but help the team as well if they were part of any of the meetings I was in. So noticing those things and being able to raise them in a way that helps people learn. And I think a lot of what happens is growing awareness, walking with them in the process so that we all can learn. They learn, and then that helps us to be better coaches as well.
Yeah, so one of the common things I'm hearing here is just having that awareness and also working together and not being the one who has all the answers necessarily, but working together to get there. I am curious, what are some of the themes, and I'll start with you, Susan, that you've seen in organizations relating to change most recently? What are some of the common themes you're seeing?
So I'm actually seeing more of an outreach to have change managers be more involved in what's happening. I think the pandemic somewhat leveled the playing field. And, in the transition to remote work, that was what I would call survival mode change, where it just happened. There wasn't a lot of communication. It wasn't well planned. It just was the way we had to survive. And so this future workplace concept of what is it going to look like, and trying to uncouple it from pandemic workplace to future workplace. Based on everything we've learned over the last couple of years, what does that future workplace look like? And I'm seeing more and more organizations engaging with change managers to say, how do we thoughtfully and effectively plan for that future workplace? And what are all the considerations? It's not just to the organizations, but also to the cities and the economies of these changes that just have occurred as a result of the last couple of years.
Yeah, I've seen a lot even before the pandemic about the workplace of the future.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting how you're phrasing it's not just the workplace of the future, but it's the future workplace and what it looks like. And it is about development and all, but it's also, with the pandemic, it's changed a lot of the equations around proximity and being around people and things like that. And I would just remind our audience here, you are welcome to put questions in the chat as we go along here. We will, towards the end, stop and pause for a Q&A section of this the panel discussion. But if you've got a question that comes up now, especially if it relates to one of our panelists, just put their name or put your question in the chat, and towards the end, we'll have those questions answered. Chi, what are some of the themes that you're seeing in organizations today related to change and change management?
I think Susan mentioned it. I call it the silver lining of the pandemic. I do, because things that were hard to do before, things you didn't even know how to broach people on, now they come into you asking for it. So this whole new world of hybrid is the biggest thing. People want to, and hybrid and retention. Somebody mentioned the Great Resignation earlier. It is very real. Pandemic opened our world. Working from anywhere is very possible and doable. And people are asking for more. And more jobs that require these have come up. So now 4 organizations are realizing, some may be a little late, that they need to get with the program. And I think it's the best thing that happened for change management. And I think, on the other hand, change management needs to be really poised to answer that call. There is a big call for change management and understanding. I mean, Susan used the best word for it, evangelist. The role of an evangelist is to be in the know and then take that knowledge to people that are not and bring it back. So that's really what change needs to be poised to do right now. So if they're not called to the table, they need to demand to be at the table, because that's the only way change can be less painless. and change is happening, and it's going to get faster and faster. And organizations need to have all three at the table, because as Diana said, coach can hold that space and be the accountability partner on both ends to say, you need this, she can help you. So now pipe down, listen, and get work done.
So can I copyright that? The silver lining of the pandemic? It is so true what you're saying. I noticed I was a training director for many years, and I remember with our team, we would say, well, let's do this virtually. Let's see if we can do this training virtually. And they're like, no way, there's no way you can do this virtually. And so it was a constant, you know, I could have used some coaching and a change manager and an executive to help me in that situation, I suppose. But when the pandemic came, it was like they figured it out. They had to. And it is an interesting how it changes your perspective when you're kind of forced to make those changes and all. Diane, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree that it was a silver lining to be able to see what we could be capable of. To be able to work remote would not have happened without this, at least in more traditional organizations. I remember asking for permission for one of my people to work remote and was told, oh no, we don't do that. And I let her do it anyway, because who was going to know, right? It made sense for certain things. But now we do have leaders, and I know all over the world saying we need to go back, we need to be in person. We have leaders at the university that are saying that. And there are certainly some roles require people to be in person. We have a medical school and a hospital that we work with, and all of those people, most of their time is spent on site. We also have some colleges where it is everything in person, but it doesn't mean they have to be in person all the time. So we have been shifting and helping people to look at what's possible instead of we have to do it this way or we have to return to the old way. When I hear someone say we have to do it like we used to do it or like we've always done it, it's a red flag and an opportunity for a conversation. And there's a lot of that. Again, you're likely seeing it with the folks that you work with. We see it in different pockets. What we've been trying to talk about is purposeful return or work on campus or in the office. What's going to be the value of that? Yesterday, I was with our leadership team, and we work a combination, we work hybrid. Some people go into the office more than others, depending on what they need. But we've actually come to the conclusion that we're not going to need the same amount of space. That will, for an institution that was constantly building before the pandemic, that changes a lot. But what we did decide was we would like to come together at least once a month for purposeful meetings we can do Zoom. I've been using Zoom. I was one of the initial Zoom users. I used to use previous GoToMeeting, I think, and then I discovered Zoom. And so when this all happened, I thought, oh, I love Zoom. This is great. But you're exactly right. Everyone, as David said, and I think everyone else, people couldn't see a way to do that. We had to be in person. Folks from Phoenix, had to drive 2 hours to come to Tucson, or we had to drive to see them in Phoenix. And now we're closer than we ever were to the folks that we work with. Doesn't mean we won't have to have some kind of in-person, but I think being purposeful about it will serve organizations better than just making a mandate that someone has to be on site.
Now that's, go ahead, Chi-Chi.
Add to what Diana just said. This is the least of the change we need to expect. Metaverse is real. Facebook just changed to Meta. AI is taking over. Virtual meetings is becoming a real thing. So organizations really need to stay limber and learn and get ahead of these changes that are coming, because people are going to demand it. I work for a utility, and we were just catching up to customers making requests to see things the way Amazon and Google does it. Now, there is nobody that is safe. You either get with the program or you be left behind, and employees will leave because they're looking to stay relevant.
Yeah, as you say that, a lot of the content we're talking about there is the change in technology and the rapidness of change as well. And I'm curious, just a follow-up question to this, what are some of the technological changes you're seeing? How do you see those changes in the workplace?
The biggest one in my world is incorporation of AI into everything. For every system now has to have AI, and you need data and you need speed of making sense with that data. So that's the biggest one that I see coming down. It's not big. A lot of people have adapted it. My organization haven't, and we need to get there fast.
Other thoughts?
I think the technology has been around for a long time, and the pace of technology releases is increasing. I think the challenge has always been our adoption, but I think what we've learned in the last couple of years is that we can adapt and quickly, and we can learn to use this technology to create, better workplaces, produce better products and services. So I'm seeing more of organizational change because we want to change. I'm not seeing as much driven by technology, but I know that there's a lot of technological advances out there that are also driving change.
Yeah, so the technology's been there, it's been available to us, but this has kind of forced us to figure out how to use it and how to use it better.
Yeah, and just to add, helping people to understand what is available has been a good thing. I think about, we used to hold meetings in person where we would get 30 to 40 people. We now hold a monthly, we call it our supervisor, our university supervisors, and it includes all the supervisors, but it also includes department heads who are generally faculty, directors, some of our principal investigators in research. I'm always amazed at who shows up. And we'll get 400 people on those, which would never have happened if we weren't in person. And so it's an opportunity and we talk with them all the time about what do they need. So it's an opportunity to inform, educate, get feedback, continue to help them to evolve, to be more agile and flexible. They have a tough time at times. We all do with that, but because we see things a certain way. But it's been a real rewarding opportunity to be with them. I have one of those meetings later this afternoon, and they're meetings that everyone looks forward to, which is so different than what used to happen when we were in person. So we will probably never go back to do those any other way. We'll have other kinds of gatherings, but we reach people much better.
So it's a leverage point in terms of resources and time. That's, the technology part of it has played a big change, and will continue to. But as you were mentioning in our discussion, a lot of the technology's been there. It's just the use of that technology that we're seeing employed now.
Yeah.
I'm curious from each of your perspectives, and I'll start with you, Chi-Chi, just maybe an example in the workplace that you've worked with of change that you guys have done and how the three roles have worked together. If you could give us, because I know when Lindsay first approached me with this, I said, I've worked with change as a learning leader, but not really as a coach. And so that's a little different in terms of the leader, the change management person, and the coach. So what's an example of change that you've been a part of, a specific example, and have those three related to each other or work together?
My organization moved headquarters during pandemic, which led into our foray into hybrid.
Wow.
So, I mean, those three roles came in beautifully during that move. One, the change management manager had to make sure that the employees are kept informed of what's happening, when it's going to happen, how it's going to impact them, what recourse they have to voice their concerns. The executive had to set the directive, we're doing this. Yes, it's pandemic, we have to do it for whatever the reason is. But the coach became extremely important here. And the coach was to say, what is your fear? Because underlying resistance is fear. So it was that role of a coach to say, yes, I hear you. Can you tell me more about why you think so? And play it out. And every time we did that, we realized that it was just lack of knowledge. And when you plug that void, people came on board. And I was sitting there, my team started laughing at me. That's when I started the whole pandemic silver lining. We were trying to introduce activity-based work before this happened. And it was like pulling teeth without Novocaine. Now people are knocking on my door asking me, how do we do this? What do we do about this? But it took those three working together with a common enemy, pandemic, to come together and say, we can do this, we have to do this. How do we do it to the best of everybody?
Yeah, so moving an organization headquarters during the middle of a pandemic, that's got to be a first.
But you know what? We did it, and we did it well. We had people come in, we organized, we did tours of the new building, we did learnings of what you need to do. We introduced activity-based work in the middle of all of that, introducing the space, and people are doing it. They did it. They came in. We had planned for them to come in and check in because your things got moved. You needed to make sure all of your things came in because after a certain window, we can't help you. People came and did that. It was doable. I mean, we did it.
Great story. And you're still here to talk about it.
Yes. Still working for the organization, and I was in the middle of that whole move.
That's incredible. That's great. It's a great story. Susan, how about you? What's an example of change that maybe we can all relate to that you've been a part of, and how did the roles work together, and what did you learn from it?
So I think this is a great question, David, and I'm actually currently working with a community-based organization that made some promises when they first launched their organization that the local community would have free access to all of their spaces. But then as they've gone through their plans and really started to look at the impact of that, they've said, hey, wait a minute, we need to also make money. So the leader has really been looking at this through the business lens. How do we make money? And one of their conclusions is that they will not be able to give the community the free access to the space like park-like settings that they had originally planned for. So the change manager role comes in and says, okay, how is this going to impact the people in the community and the relationship between the community and this organization? And how do we craft the messaging to make that happen? And the coach has served a really crucial role, in my opinion, of coaching both the leader and the change manager to be that objective third party, to see both sides, to be able to bring those sides together and to point out things that the leader and change manager might miss because of their different lenses or perspectives on the project.
Yeah, so that, it's interesting you say that, because I've been a part of the organization in terms of doing lots of different changes, and thinking of who is in each role. Sometimes the title is not change manager. So who, and a lot of times, serves the role of the change manager, Susan, in that case?
So I think, again, it goes back to the thought partner, right? It's someone who understands the impact to the people and helps to reduce that resistance. So you're kind of leveraging that pulse of the community or the organization and the relationship. And so it could be anybody who can step into that role, but they really need to understand messaging, and they need to understand the basis for resistance and how to short circuit that or to minimize it.
Yeah, great example. And a lot of organizations have faced that, especially with the downturn in the economy and all, money versus community. And we're here for a profit, but obviously that's a big change in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Diane, how about you? What's an example of change you've been a part of?
The hospital CEO that I mentioned earlier, the way I ended up working with that individual was because a consultant that was contracting with them for culture change is what they called it. And the individual had folks on their team that they had multiple resources, but one like for training, for change management, but they wanted a coach because this particular executive, they had multiple consultants. I think this was the third round they were going through, and they could not seem to shift what was happening as they would take pulse surveys or check in with the employees on how they were feeling. Nothing was moving, and in fact, it was getting worse. So having particularly the change management partner was helpful because, and I would say that the CEO, the first time I met him, he said, we sat across from each other, okay, so what are you going to do differently? And a nice enough guy, really caring overall, came in to turn the situation around. They were in a financial deficit. He had come from one of the large automakers, wasn't a hospital administrator, but was extremely savvy in finances and turnaround. And that's what they needed. And I said to him, it's not what I'm going to do. It's what you're going to do differently. And he looked at me like, what? And he was willing to engage. The consultants had said maybe he needed to be fired, but that wasn't where we started from. And I said to them, I'm not starting from there as a coach, because if that's the case, then that's what you should do. But as a coach, we need to be in this. And so he was willing to look and do the work. And it took a while, but we also would meet with the change manager because they were doing background work on what were some of the plans that what they saw as important to be able to help this organization shift. And in the end, what the staff would say, what the employees would say was of anything that changed the most, it was the way the CEO interacted with them, because he was a very nice and charismatic individual, but he was still operating in a turnaround. And it wasn't until he could understand his impact on others that he actually made a change. And then the folks that we were working with in partnership, the consultants and change management folks, could help in that process because we would have a discovery that, like I said, when I was on site, that would happen one time. He was very charismatic. He was talking to about 25 of his leaders. And suddenly he sat down, and when he sat down, he picked up a pen and he wrote something down. And so did everybody else. And I thought, ooh, what just happened? We went to a break and I asked him, I made the observation to him and said, what did you write down? Why? I don't want to tell you. And said, you better tell me, and we're going to have to tell them, because if not, we're going to be in the same storyline of, oh, John always, there he goes again. He told us to do this last week. Now I give it to him. And he's saying, what'd you do that for? And sure enough, what he wrote down was pick up bread and milk on the way home. The human thought that came into his head that he did not want other people to know, because that would have made him human. And when we told the group, and came back from the break, people were falling off their chairs. We didn't ask anybody what they thought he said, but later people were telling him and me, but it was like the reality of how people listened to him and the impact he had. And he had no idea that was what was happening. And they had no idea everything that came out of his mouth wasn't a direct order. But this gave them an opportunity to shift that, to change. And so we then had a debrief with the consultants as well that then helped to build on that and look at the future.
Wow, what a great story. And it takes me back to what you said earlier about the truth teller. You had the chance there to be the truth teller, and it made a huge difference. And especially with, it seemed like 3 different things were going on there with the leader, the change, and the coach. And sometimes positionally, that's the thing that's challenging about any of those positions, is being humble and being open to change. My last question for you as we depart here, I'm looking at these 3 roles that we've talked about: the leader, the coach, and the change leader. What are some of the skills needed? And I'll let each of you speak to each of those. What are some of the skills needed? If I wanted to enter this arena and be a change coach per se, something I hadn't really thought a lot about until this session, or to be a change manager, or a change leader, what are the skills that are needed? Susan, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I would say that the ability to facilitate, which is really that balance of listening and communicating and sort of surfacing the wisdom of the group to find out what the core interests are, which leads me to the second thing, which is really an understanding of the interest-based problem-solving methodology, so that you don't have people get mired in positions, but you get them focused on their interests and then move them to common interests and then move them towards solutions that address the common interests. So negotiation is a huge piece of that as well. And I think it's helpful for a change manager to be an ambivert, to have that balance between introversion and extroversion, because the introversion piece allows you to be a really good listener and to pick up on those social cues. And the extrovert allows you to be that evangelist, to get the messaging out, get people excited about it, and help them move or shift off of where they are.
So ambivert, is that a skill that you can develop?
It can be learned. So I would say, some people are introverts or extroverts, but they can learn to be more of one when the situation calls for it. And, I think very few of us are natural ambiverts, but it is a practice skill set.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm an introvert that is parading as an extrovert every day at work.
Yes, Chi-Chi, you're right on track.
That's great. How about you, Diane? What are some of the skills that you see that are needed
as a coach? Yeah.
Oh,
well, and I see some questions popping up as well that look quite good. And I think one is for Susan here. Do you want to expand on that now, or should I?
We'll wait. We'll come back to that.
Okay. Yeah. I would say it's important as a coach to get some grounding in coach training, even for those who are really experienced and have felt that they've done coaching in different ways throughout their career. I know for me, as I went into coach training, I kept thinking, oh, this is a lot of what I learned as management. It's being a good manager. It's understanding people. It's psychology. It's all of the things. There are so many things that make up coaching. And so it is worthwhile to actually have some coach specific training and to continue to develop yourself as a professional in coaching. I would say for me, and what I see the most, I think, happen, I remember myself as a new coach, and it still happens on occasion, but not as much. Sometimes people don't do what we think. Many times people don't do what we think they should, where they have committed to something they were going to do and then they don't. We don't want to be tied to that outcome. That's their outcome. If we're more tied to it, than they are, it's not the right thing for them to do. And so recognizing that in ourselves. And what I would do, initially was, if I found myself worried about how did that session really go, or what was happening, be a reflective practitioner, write some things down for yourself to be able to look at what went well, what didn't, what did I learn? And the other thing I would write is, what do I hope for that client? Inevitably, those were the people that called me the next day or said, that was the best session. Here's what I realized, or I realized that wasn't what I really wanted to do. And that didn't land, but it made me think about what did I need or what did I want? And so that goes to then trusting yourself, trusting your client, and trusting the process. And being, I think in today's environment with executives, being patient, recognizing they're doing the best they can in any moment. We all are, but still persisting and challenging and being in that conversation.
Thank you, Diane. Chi, I'll let you share with us what skills you think we need for the role of the leader.
I think the biggest skill the leader needs is humanity. That ability to be vulnerable, to show that you're human, you're not perfect. Ability to know yourself. What are you afraid of? What is leading to your decisions? And be able to hold it and listen to somebody else and change if need be. Most leaders, before you get to that point, you already have some skills. That's great. But in leading in a change, it is about understanding people, starting with yourself, and being able to listen, truly listen to what somebody is saying, and listen to what they're not saying in between the words, and be able to articulate your vision and what you're hearing and bring them together.
So that's a tall order.
That's what it takes in the time that we're in.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I appreciate all of you. I'm going to transition now to Lindsay and Carissa, because I know they've been keeping track of some of the questions coming in and offer some of those questions that we're getting from our audience.
Yeah, Marie asks that, we're experiencing multidimensional change, including social dynamics such as social and racial equality. What do you think is the role of leaders to truly embrace DE&I to create more humane workplaces? Example, removing structural barriers to minorities and women to rise into leadership roles.
Chi, I'll let you start off with that, and then I'll let the others chime in as they see fit.
It goes to that listening skill again, right? We tend to view the word from our worldview and expect everybody sees the word the way we see it, but that's not the truth. If you can hold your truth and let somebody else share their truth, you start to hear the difference. And when you hear that, how do you look at the policies that you have? Because there's some unwritten things that you might not feel because I'm not experiencing that, but somebody else is feeling. Bring them into the change. What would you change here to remove this bias that you're feeling or this resistance that you're feeling? It goes back to that humanity and bringing people to make decisions from different aspects of life. Having a woman where there is mostly men will bring in a perspective that you never thought of. Having a kid in the mix of adults. My 5-year-old asks me questions all the time that made me think, oh, I never thought of that. I need to plug that hole because I assumed everybody understood what I was saying. So bring people around you that are different from you to make decisions and lay the cards on the table. Put your idiosyncrasies, whatever is your issues on the table and let the solution emerge. And every time you do that, that is the best solution for everybody involved.
That's great. Any other thoughts on that from the others?
I would say organizationally, it is it's the job of everyone. and you know, as Chi-Chi said, the listening piece, making sure that we're all listening and that it's not one person or one department, but that we actually integrate DE&I and work in what we learn in our work all over. And that's big and not something that happens easily or everywhere. And it could be better. I think it is something, you know, as I look at our institution, again, yesterday we were having a leadership retreat and talking about what do we do now and what could we be doing differently and who do we need to engage and involve. And they may not have the same idea as what, you know, this leader felt or thought, because they have different experiences. So really not just listening, but taking action as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would add to what both Diane and Chi-Chi said, and Chi-Chi, I love that humanity piece. So our brains are constantly scanning our environment for threats and rewards, and we will see threats where others don't see threats. And so being that really thoughtful leader is about understanding what is causing a threat response in someone else, because that shuts down our cognitive ability and it creates the resistance because it's fearful for us. So the areas that we really want to look at, there's 5, and this is based on the work of Dr. David Rock. So the first is status. So how do we reduce threat responses for people potentially losing status or not being able to gain status in the organization? Certainty. How can we create some certainty, especially during times of change where we've got ambiguity and uncertainty about outcomes or expectations? Autonomy. How do we give people more of a sense that they have a role in, or they have the ability to make decisions that impact them or those that report to them and they work with? Relatedness is about our relationship with others. How does this change impact those relationships? And then fairness, which I think is a huge piece. Is status and fairness to me come up as part of the DE&I equation. How do we ensure that we have that fairness and that we are giving all people a seat at the table based on their knowledge, their skills, their experiences? So this is David Rock's SCARF model, and it's a really powerful way to approach change, because during change, all of those domains are in deficit, and we need to find a way to create rewards to offset those deficits.
Thank you all for sharing. Lindsay or Carissa, the one who's going to ask the next question.
I don't see any others in the chat. There are any raised hands? Y'all speak or forever hold your peace.
I guess I'll go ahead and ask one. Wendy Below here from ACMP, Texas. We talked a lot about, you know, luckily because of the silver lining of the pandemic, we realize we don't have to always be face-to-face. But I think a great challenge for this group is what I'd call the intensive sessions, when people are face-to-face, when they are in person. How can we make those sessions the most effective? No, we don't say that we need to be together all the time, but you say we should have some intensive sessions for our teams to be effective. What do we need to bring to those intensive sessions?
Thank you, Wendy. That's an excellent question. Who wants to take that one on?
Yeah, you know, we went through a major computer implementation learning management system in the middle of all this. We met once in person with the vendor, and, you know, kind of scoped out what it would look like, how we would train people, what was the, you know, how are we going to be going through this change and implementation. And then we were in the pandemic and everything went remote and no one was able to be in person. And so it took a lot. I mean, I can appreciate your work remotely because it took a lot more than what we anticipated in helping to do the training and helping to drive the implementation, making sure our IT was doing what they needed, all of that coordination. We managed through it. And right now we're still remote, and IT is thinking they will always be remote, but they have been open to, as we go through certain kinds of updates or conversion, coming together personally, in person rather, to be able to work with the group, the leadership on what's this going to look like. Because one of the things I'd say that we learned in this, it's where those gaps were highlighted. The project was severely under-resourced. And so it would have been a challenge in person. I almost think it might have been, we were lucky that we weren't in person given some of what happened, but it makes, I would say, that intense planning and making sure people are all on board probably does need to happen more in person, or at least periodically in person.
Right, thank you.
Other thoughts on how to make in-person better?
I would say keep the connection levels that we had early on during the pandemic. There was a lot of compassion. There was, you were seeing a window into people's lives, their families, children were showing up on Zoom meetings, pets. And then all of a sudden, when people went back to the office, it was sort of like what it was before, where you were just a worker. And so if there is a way that you can bring those connections back in and really humanize those interactions, I think that's really powerful, because those connections are so important. And that's part of what employees are asking for in terms of their flexibility, is also to have these deeper connections.
Are we building a case for bring your cat to work?
I will say you need to know who is in the room, the need.
Yeah.
Because if you understand the need of in the room, then you will design the meeting in a way that everybody feels like they are valued and what they have to share is important. Which goes back to what Suzanne just said. It's about understanding people, what is interesting, what stops you from taking 5 minutes of the meeting to share personal things, what your pet is doing. That relaxes people. And when people are relaxed and feels valued, then they are present and you get what you need.
That's great. Thank you. Lindsay, I think I see some more questions in the chat.
Yes. So one of the questions, what does Diane look for when hiring an internal coaching staff? And then I'm going to be uncoach-like and stack questions because we are approaching time. And then the toughest issue you've had to overcome with a client, and that I think is for the group.
Okay.
Yeah, so hiring internal coaching staff, I think they actually did a pretty good job when I was, when I came in, making sure that people had, and I had a colleague that also came in at the same time, but having some criteria for what you're looking for in a coach, making sure that the coach understands, like, what is the role, what are the expectations, because it is a little different in an organization than what it was being an independent, and where we fit in that process and what kind of work we'd be doing. And then having actually a practical, like having you coach as part of that interview. I think it was really helpful for people to understand, what do we do? So our folks that were on the hiring team, we had to actually, they asked us a scenario, or we had to actually coach to give an understanding of that. So, but really looking, and I would say, having that coach training, not necessarily having to be an MCC, but having, being on the path toward credentialing and being willing to learn and be open, because things evolve. We have a coach, another internal coach that actually we sent for coach training rather than recruit from outside. And she's fabulous. And she does coaching, but she also does organizational development work and learn, bringing teams together, to help with culture change and implementing new programs.
Thank you, Diane. And the follow-up question was around the toughest issue change management issue you've faced. Chi was laughing. She's got a thought way back.
Suzanne go with that one.
Okay, go ahead.
Aren't they all the toughest we've ever faced?
You think it was until then the next one happens.
Yeah. I would say that to me, no change is difficult in and of itself. But the biggest challenge is when the leaders don't think they need change management and they don't invite you to the table. So there's meetings going on about the change, and you as the change manager are responsible for bringing the rest of the group around, and you're not in those critical meetings and you're not part of those discussions. And so having someone who has said, oh, I've done these kinds of technology implementations, or I've done these kind of changes my entire life and have never had change management, helping them to see the value of how much smoother your programs go and how much more readily people adopt and utilize whatever change it is. That's the biggest challenge. And to me, that requires coaching skills. It requires change management skills, and it really requires understanding where that leader's coming from. And I sort of liken it to when you're in a plane and it's a small plane and they're trying to land and there's clouds everywhere and they start to go, they keep looking for the break in the clouds before they can actually go down and land. That's, to me, the biggest challenge, is finding that break in the clouds where I can connect with that leader and get them to see the value of what we're trying to accomplish together.
Great answer. I like that.
Next to that, I would say the leader that insists that they know how to do it and insists on telling you what to do.
Yes.
And you're telling them that's not going to work. They're like, yeah, do it this way. But the solution is the same thing, trying to find that point of communication to let them, like, let me show you. And then if what I show you doesn't work, we'll do it your way. It's just finding that point where they can listen.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for offering that. Thanks for the answer. Lindsay, I'm going to say thank you very much to our panelists, first of all, for your time today and for our audience and for your great questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for your expert moderation and facilitation. I'm going to be listening to the recording of this, which will go out, because I've been taking notes assiduously, but also, being mindful of my hosting duties. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So again, this is just an overview of the types of programs we've had in 2021. We're going to continue these information-rich, go beneath the surface, different perspective panels and coaching demos. And as we move into 2022, the leaders from the ICF Texas chapters and ACMP Texas will continue to explore what's going to be relevant and meaningful in this new reality of work that we are all adjusting to, and bringing our talents to help those that we serve navigate the change that is what will be the only constant through 2022. So if you can please take a few minutes, we've dropped a survey into the chat if you haven't filled it out already. Last slide, please. And again, make sure to visit the websites and look for emails and social media posts of the various chapters, whether you are ACMP or ICF, or if you're a guest, you can find these types of events on our websites. And with that, you all get another 10 minutes before your next 1 o'clock. Again, very much as a token of our appreciation, really want to thank Chi-Chi, Diane, Susan, and David for taking time out of their very busy schedules to share with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.